non-stop coverage of Budget 2025 on expectations, on challenges for the government. Every single time when it's the budget session, you see a lot of talk about it being a political budget. This time too, we're days away from the Delhi election, so there's a lot of focus on what kind of announcements will be made for the middle class, for the poor. Indications have come from the government that you can expect some tax relief. And we've discussed that already here, which we will continue to do so. Let's talk about the challenges for the government. We've shown you the GDP numbers, the GDP growth figures. One of the big challenges that people also want addressed by the government is that of inflation. Sakshi, run us through really why inflation is a challenge right now for the government, particularly food inflation.
Absolutely, Akshata, you pointed out absolutely right. Over here, when we look at the kind of inflationary figures that we've been seeing, you will continue to see that food inflation has been the key pain point for the middle class, for the salaried taxpayers. That is something that is a big challenge. Although we have come off the highest point, we are now at 4.95%, but it is still above the RBI's comfort band of 4 plus 2%. So look at it that way, and this remains to be a challenge not just in India but worldwide over as well. 2024, the biggest challenge, the biggest enemy of the RBI has been inflation. But the problem is that in just tackling inflation, we've also let go of a lot of growth as well. We are now slowing down. If you look at the last quarter figures, they were at 5.9%. We've come down sharply from 9.7% to 5.9% in the kind of figures that we saw in the last quarter. The advanced GDP estimates now point at 6.4%, which is sharply lower than what the world agencies had, the IMF had, the World Bank had, and even our own estimates were much higher. Now we are looking at sub 7% growth. Let's actually welcome all our guests on board to give us a sense of what needs to be done to get the GDP growth ball rolling. Apart from Divya Baweja, Rakesh Nagia-Chintan, we also have Rumki Majumdar, economist at Deloitte India, now joining in. Rumki, coming to you straight. I think growth and GDP is the key question at this point in time. What needs to be done in this budget that can get our GDP back on track, above 7%? Already the economic survey has pointed out we do need at least 1 to 2 decades of 8% plus growth if we need to achieve our target of Viksit Bharat. At this point in time, there are global uncertainties, there are domestic uncertainties as well. What can the budget really put in forth that can get growth back? Rumki.
Thank you so much. And I agree, there are a lot of uncertainties that you mentioned about. What I think India needs to do is to rely more on domestic demand. And one of the biggest contributor of that would be the consumption. Right now, consumption has been good, but it needs to get better and much more sustained, because that will bring in more private investments, because that segment is also not picking up as much. So to boost consumption, we expect there should be some boost to the middle income class of people, because they are the ones who are, as you rightly mentioned, suffering because of the inflation, which has been very high over the last few years. So one is probably the government might go for a tax cut, especially in the new tax regime where they have the 7 to 10 lakh segment. They might go for an exemption there. There is a possibility they might look for some initiatives to boost employment. That is, again, another very important initiative that has to happen, because real wages have actually been very not been growing as much. So employment generation is another. I think CapEx will be a focus, because that creates a lot of employment, especially for semi-skilled people. So all these initiatives will be focused on during the budget, as we expect.
Can we just talk about, employment and jobs that Rumki also has pointed out? Sakshi, if you could run us through really the data on the unemployment figures right now. What's that looking like?
Absolutely. This has been, I think, the biggest pain point that the government has actually been facing, not just this time, but it's been years and years of facing why jobs are just not there. Remember last time around, the government did mention that they are launching this internship scheme, but that also has not seen any good start. There are again challenges on that front as well. Look at how choppy this has been in terms of the unemployment rate. Right now, we are at 7.8% at this point in time, and we really need to see how more and more jobs can be created at this point in time. Let's actually go across to Rakesh Nangia and get that question across to him. Mr. Nangia, help us understand. Do you think there is enough being done to create jobs? Is the onus only on the government to get this pedal going, or is the onus also on corporate India to start pumping in money, to start contributing to the economy so that we can see more and more jobs? What is it that the fiscal measures should be taken in the budget to get jobs going, and what is it that the corporate India has to really take in on themselves and on their shoulders?
I think the most important thing is this, and let's believe it, private sector is not spending the money or investing the money the way the government expects the private sector to spend. The whole burden goes to the government actually. And you see the government has been the dominant doing the expenditure on the complete infrastructure, on the complete economic development of the country. This is the gap here. And this gap has to be plugged by government incentivizing it, by removing bottlenecks in the business, by boosting a lot of dosage of policies, fiscal measures to see that the development and it takes place. Let me give you a small example. If you see, no country in the world has become a developed country without developing its infrastructure. And every country which is a developed country will have a very strong infrastructure. This is the two factors there. And you see the total expenditure which the government has allocated for infrastructure was in the last budget was 11.11 lakhs crore. This is and you see the expenditure in the previous 5 years, there's an increase of 5 times in last 10 years in infrastructure expenditure. The entire panacea, if you need to believe in a one line, is the infrastructure, which takes spending on infrastructure, which takes care of the entire economic development of the country. One expenditure. And then it goes into the complete supply chain. And the capex surge has been practically in the last 5 years, there has been a growth of 27%. You see these figures of and there has been a government needs to ensure that 30% of annual rise in infrastructure allocation to take place. It took place previously, except the current year, which is there. Last year only there was a 10% growth, but the government needs to grow at the 30% incremental growth on spending on infrastructure is concerned. And this slowdown in GDP basically, which happened actually, the government needs to correct this fall by ensuring the pumping of the money that continues to take place. 1 rupee spent on infrastructure generates 3 times of the GDP. And 1 rupee you put as a direct benefit scheme of the government only places a GDP of 9.90 paise.
So it's going to be a tightrope walk for the government between jobs and the deficit that they have to also fix.